Evening all. I'd like to go over with you a very exciting game of Nakamura in the US Championship, not yet covered on this channel. It was against the up-and-coming Ray Robson. So I believe it was in the third round on the 10th of May 2012, this US Championship this year. And Naka kicked off with E4, and we saw a very exciting variation of the Sicilian defence. In this position, Black played G6, signifying the Sicilian Dragon, and Naka played Bishop E3, mainline move. Now Bishop G7 was played. You might want to know, if Knight G4, then Bishop B5 check might be strong here, because Bishop D7 as Queen takes G4. So White can omit F3 here quite safely, because Knight G4 is not that effective. So Bishop G7, and now F3 here. Knight C6, and White plays Queen D2, which is all pretty standard. White often aims to exchange off this dark square bishop, and often use the H file. So the dragon had a bit of battering in its reputation when Fischer used to beat dragons almost routinely using the H file, but things have changed. Lots of theory revolving around the Sicilian Dragon. Okay, after castles, now White plays G4, and one of the ideas of this is to discourage a quick D5. You can imagine if White castles queenside, and I believe D5 has got very popular in this position. So G4 is presumably to try and discourage that, because then G5 would be attacking the knight, and also the pawn would be attacking the bishop after. So Black plays actually Bishop E6 here, and we have, it's a controversial looking move. Why does Black want to give up the light square bishop and also inflict, double pawns, kind of self-inflicted double pawns with Bishop E6? There are some dynamic points. The F file could be useful for Black for natural piece activity along that F file. If Black can get a knight to C4 later, White's light square bishop will be needed to capture on C4. So maybe this weakness of this diagonal, or the double pawns, is a bit of an illusion. Is it really an exploitable weakness? That's a big question of this game. And White actually decides to take it. Okay, he takes it, F takes, and now castles. So now we see Knight E5. So the knight is immediately attacking F3. And also it's going to be useful for a later Knight C4 potentially. Bishop E2 protecting F3, and if Black doesn't do anything, maybe G5 first and then F4 will be quite nasty, gaining space, and maybe even the bishop can come to G4 eyeing E6. So Queen C8 here was played, and this provides, of course, Knight C4 is now possible, guarded by that queen. It looks a bit artificial. You usually want a rook on C8, but in this current position, the rook has got potential activity already. So really it all depends on the position, how effective these rook moves are. If the rook's potentially got activity already, then why move the F1? And the A1, that might even just drop a pawn. You never know. It is protecting the A7 pawn. So the queen, to leverage this Knight C4 to make that more effective, seems actually a logical choice here. And Naka continued with H4, as though, okay, he can play H5 maybe and peel open the H file. I think that's the main plan. He doesn't really want to play G5 in a hurry. If there is Knight H5, that will seal up the king side, and the defender really wants to seal up the open lines and make sure no open lines can occur. These are the access paths for potentially exploitable weaknesses, these open lines, so they're actually critical to try and achieve. But White has a plan B, just to gain space potentially and just use the bishop pair if possible. Knight FD7 preempts a G5 idea, and not really bothering now about G5 Knight H5, indicating instead the knight might be usefully deployed like this to get to C4. Okay, F4, very sharp tactical move actually. The prelude now to a very powerful looking pawn sacrifice. If the Black knight goes back, I would imagine here G5 is actually quite strong for Bishop G4, celebrating the bishop, eyeing E6. So the knight goes to C4, and that looks a lot safer. Get rid of White's light squared bishop. So white does take, you can't afford really to leave it there, because it looks as though knight takes b2 could be really dangerous, because c3 is quite vulnerable. Look at this coordination here. So bishop takes c4 seems perfectly reasonable. Queen takes c4. Now a very interesting temporary pawn sacrifice, okay, is about to occur. Not immediately here, but at e5, black cannot take on e5 because the knight, of course. So he gets knight out of the way, but white's intention is not to play e takes d6 here. That would seem to be quite dangerous. Maybe black can play things like knight a4, or even just okay, ed, and then if queen takes, then bishop takes c3. The queen is defending c3 in this scenario, so this is quite dangerous for white's king potentially. Instead, no, he's actually just using this to shut out the bishop and accelerate maybe his own attack. So he plays actually h5. The standard mechanism here of just peeling open the h file. Now Ray played d takes e5, and now we get this h file opened up, and it looks dangerous. This next move looks really dangerous, queen h2, because there's actually a threat of check, king moves, and then rook h6. I'm going to demonstrate that. Say rook c8, queen h7 is a routine attacking concept for rook h6 using the pin, attacking g6, and black's king safety is going to be shot to pieces here if he's not careful. Okay, if takes, actually bishop d4 might even be really, really strong, using that pin to start off with. e5, bishop takes e5. So in this position after queen h2, actually Ray plays something quite radical, an exchange sack, because actually, okay, he plays rook takes f4, but actually if he did play e takes f4, then even stronger here than queen h7 would appear to be, if I give you 10 seconds, can you guess what it is? I might have actually noted it in another variation as a clue. So 10 seconds here, instead of queen h7 check, what would be a killer attacking move here? Okay, 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, bishop d4 here. Because if bishop takes d4, then queen h7 is not just check but mate. If e5, then bishop takes e5, and if the queen tries to defend, then we have a beautiful move here. Can you spot it? If I give you 10 seconds. Okay, queen h8. So this diagonal is really dangerous for the black king, as these variations demonstrate. As it's not just the ability to check on h7, it's this ability to challenge that bishop head on across the diagonal, which is really dangerous to the black king. So maybe this partly explains, you know, black's idea just to sacrifice the exchange now and try and get rid of the queens. And Naka actually takes this, not minding the queen exchange, but he doesn't of course want to take here because it would liberate that bishop along the diagonal. No, he lets Ray take on h2. He casually played king b1. So what has Ray got for being the exchange down here? It's a very, very interesting position already after queen takes, rook takes. These treble pawns, he's got, okay, white's got 4 pawns and he's got technically 6 pawns, but of course having treble pawns, the rowing boat team is out and about today, good for the summer. Okay, but are they actually useful? Can white just actually use this e4 square to get a knight dangerously inside black's position? That's the question. Or can black make use of that f file, this weakened g4 pawn? There's no island around that pawn. That pawn's all a bit lonely, isolated there. Black's next move aims to gobble that g4 pawn, rook f8. Okay, now knight e4, and we see basically an exchange of weaknesses. After rook f4, white is deciding to exchange the g4 weakness for the e6 weakness. But what will be the effectiveness of having a knight on e6? There's no way anyway black can defend this, so he might as well just take on g4 here. So knight takes e6. So it's double pawns now. Pawn structure a little bit repaired, you could argue. Okay, but does black want to give up the dark square bishop? Not really sure about that. If white first of all does something to make sure he's not going to get back throw mated, then after taking here, a move like rook d8 to b8 would seem quite powerful. Black actually preserves his dark square bishop with bishop f6, and also of course king f7 might be useful to attack the knight on e6 here. Okay, Naka does play b3 anyway, and you know, he might play c4 now, and in fact after his next move he's not tempted by check because king f7, and it would seem uncomfortable that position for white. The knight's going to come to d6 next if this knight moves. So actually what he does do here is ignore rook d8, and he plays actually c4. Should we just engine verify? This is an interesting technical position. Was it c4 the best idea? It seems actually it's Houdini's choice is c4 coming up, a top 2 choice. So inviting knight d6 for the idea of c5 as we see here. So let's stop that. That's a very strong move, but white's advantage isn't such a big deal, it seems, from an engine point of view at this point in the game. c4, inviting knight d6, and now another move, inviting another aggressive knight move to b5, and the question becomes, can black actually usefully coordinate these 3 pieces and one of this passed pawn as well? That's a potential menace. So the scenery is set up for a very, very dramatic continuation. I believe this is one of the most dramatic finishes of a game in the US Championship, what we're about to witness soon. Rook d7 sets the scene actually for installing both rooks later on the 7th rank. A rook on the 7th rank, Nxd4 has a chapter in my system. The idea of restricting the king, quite often, statistically, pawns are still on the 7th rank, you know, waiting to be picked up. So there's multiple advantages. If you can improve your king quality over the opponent's king quality, or even set up mating nets, there are many benefits as a general rule of getting rooks to the 7th. So king f7, and now rook takes b7, so attacking a knight in response to his knight being attacked. And now Ray plays check, and after king c2, well, king b2, e4 check. You don't really want to encourage this pawn too much, but bear that in mind for later, because what you're about to see is an amazing continuation in relation to that pawn soon. Knight check, and now the king's got to attack the knight, because remember, white's knight is hanging here. So king b2, and now knight b1, which looks awkward because the knight's kind of stranded there on b1. In fact, the knight will be will not move from there for the rest of the game. I believe it will just stay there. Look at that knight stay there. But now, how does white arrange his rooks to coordinate and connect in order to achieve a rook on the 7th connection between the 2 rooks? Actually, this might be an issue, this e7 pawn disrupting communication. So Naka's plan here, this is like military strategy on a chessboard here. He wants to have maximum communication between his 2 major sort of artillery pieces here. He's got to knock out e7 to establish that communication across the 7th rank. And this next move, knight d8 check, seems to be gunning very shortly at the e7 pawn. So king e8, knight c6, gunning on the e7 pawn with a threat already of knight takes, and if bishop takes, then rook h8 might be dangerous. Or there might be other dangerous threats, but these threats are starting to get quite unpleasant. But black has his own threats too. He plays e4 check. That pawn is only 3 steps away from queening. King c2. No, actually the knight did move. Sorry, I think it returned back to b1, and that was why I mentioned about the knight being on b1. It did move here, and it returns back to b1. So it's encouraged the king to go to e3. Okay, a token check on a3, or was it? The king is a dark square target for the dark square bishop for further checks here and harassment at the moment. Check, and it keeps being on a dark square here after king f2. Rook c1. Okay, and that's attacking c5 rather unpleasantly, and also perhaps rook c2 will be very useful. For example, king g3 might start to be dangerous if takes, and maybe e3. So there's quite a lot of dangers here lurking for white. But this rook on h2 has got out of the way here with rook h7. Okay, but now check, king g3. again on the dark square, rook c3, king g4 on a light square, now away from the bishop at least, e3, and now white knocks out that e7, which is disrupting communication with these two otherwise very well placed rooks on the 7th. So knight takes e7, but is this at a huge cost, taking this out? Because surely black now has only 2 steps away from queening, and now after e2 only 1 step away from queening. Knight d5 setting up huge threats of knight takes f6 and mating now with the 2 rooks. But black has an interesting trick up his sleeve, which must have been calculated by Naka. Rook g3 check to queen with check here, and that would be deadly for white in this position. If takes, then queening with check. This looks as though it's going to be lost. This knight's going to be lost, and black's going to be able to defend. For example, check here, and then queen takes d5, and there's no mate here in this position. Bishop d8, and black will be winning this ending if he sort of liquefied. Sorry, if he simplified. This would be a winning ending for black trivially, because that pawn would be enough. The knight could mop out these pawns with the king's help and use this as a decoy. So this scenario is not tolerable. So the king bravely goes to a dark square, home of the dark square bishop, and the dark square bishop uses that fact, and this is incredibly immense calculation. When I was looking at this game live, I just thought, what is going on here? Can white get away with this? Isn't this pawn potentially winning here? Check, and the king is now again encouraged to take on g3, or seemingly play an absurd move to the e file, just allowing queening with check. But believe it or not, this is exactly what Naka does here. He plays king e5. It's like a virtual queen sacrifice, this position. But look at the king quality now. After check with queening, the king quality, it's assisting multiple mating net threats now. Mating threats on h8, because that bishop's just left h8. So rook h8, rook b8. But surely you might ask, well, black's a queen up, but what useful checks has he got here? He can't play bishop e7, then just rook takes e7. Everything's covering that sufficiently, e7. So black actually is in dire straits here. Pardon the music route pun. Dire straits. So bishop f4 check, a token check as it turns out. White just takes, and now another token check. White just takes. Thanks very much. Check. Knight e5. Where are your checks now, Ray? Your checks have run out, haven't they? There's no checks, and black is still faced with the mating possibilities. And he gives in here. He resigns. But a spectacular finish, because I don't remember too many games where you're allowing your opponent to sort of queen with check and then forcing through your own mating net. So I thought that was pretty spectacular stuff. Let's have a look in overview and summary at this game. So a very, very interesting Sicilian Dragon game. They usually are. Sicilian itself is one of the more exciting, dynamic openings in chess, because it creates usually non-symmetrical pawn structures. Some of the scourges of creating boring games is based in the pawn structure, which is the soul of the game. Philidor used to say that the very life and soul of the game is in the pawn structure. Look at this pawn structure. It just looks very exciting already, and it's made to look thrilling, with black having trebled pawns very soon after this what turns out to be a temporary pawn sack here. White's intention was actually to speed up his attack with h5. We have a thrilling pawn structure and thrilling possibilities. And black's king is slightly weakened, but in more ways than one. Not just the h file, but potentially if this pawn moves, then this diagonal is critical and the variations show up. So queen h2 and then rook takes f4. A very interesting imbalance of material. So 2 pawns for the exchange. The exchange of weaknesses transaction, because both sides don't really can't or not willing to defend their weaknesses, rather give them up and get the opponents. So still here 2 pawns for the exchange, and big questions arise it's like a big debate here. White's king safety and black's coordination of pieces, will that prevail over white's coordination of pieces and black's king safety? And one of this passed pawn as well. Throw that into the mix. So we have a really, really tense situation evolved here with these attacking pieces on both sides, entrenching themselves in the opponent's territory, and the white king having to survive a wave of checks, being kicked around now. The knight did return to b1 and then it stayed there, but now this e pawn and this brave king march right into the black position here is just spectacular. The king is going to end up on d6, as we witnessed, after these decoy checks and allowing pawn promotion. Amazing calculation looking ahead here to determine the king is safely okay, you know, on d6, and the mating net threats will prevail here. What can black do here? If we just check this with an engine just to make absolutely clinically sure this is a lost position, it is like +6. Best move being bishop e7 or queen e7. When that shows, then that's pretty helpless. Black is certainly helpless here. So he plays his 2 token checks, and we end up again, the mating nets are ready here, the mates. I thought that was a really exciting game from the US Championship. I hope you boys and girls on YouTube did as well. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.